Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen of the press, citizens of Trinidad and Tobago, supporters of the United National Congress in Trinidad and Tobago, throughout the Caribbean, North America, and Europe, wherever you may be, listening to this feed and following our social media platforms. Welcome to our midweek press conference organized by the Opposition United National Congress. We are broadcasting live now from our spanking new headquarters in Chaguanas, Trinidad, where we are live. Today, we intend to deal with several matters, critical matters of current affairs, matters of economy, politics, and society. Trinidad and Tobago now, as we all know, is in a very volatile stage. There's enormous turbulence, be it economic fallout, cyber attacks, hacking, breach of data, and so on. Apart from that, we have the issues of crime, of poverty, of destitution, the collapse of our health sector, our education sector, all our institutions that are critical for stability and development. We intend to address a few of these matters today in this press conference, midweek press conference organized as usual by the opposition in Trinidad and Tobago. This morning I have with me the very dynamic Member of Parliament for the constituency of Princestown, who is also our Shadow Minister of Public Utilities, Mr. Barry Padarath. And MP Padarath will address us on several of the very critical matters facing the national community today, involving the TSTT, involving the cyber attacks, and so on, and other related matters in the utility sector and matters facing Trinidad and Tobago, which are at this stage boiling on the front burner, so to speak. So without any further ado, could I invite MP Padarath to address us? Thank you.
A pleasant good day to each and every one of you viewing on various social media platforms, members of the media, Trinidad and Tobago, and throughout the wider world. A pleasant good morning to my colleague, the Member of Parliament for Oldbridge East. This morning I want to deal with a few matters that has taken the national space in terms of the attention of the national community. And when you look at all three front pages of today's newspaper, let's start with the Daily Express. It says, TSTT CEO fired. The Trinidad Guardian has said it another way. AGAD axed, fallout from massive TSTT cyber attack. Board acts days after her public apology, and Western named new acting CEO. The Trinidad Newsday has as its front page, weeks after major cyber attack, TSTT CEO gone. With the national community's attention focused on the recent cyber attacks at TSTT, let us contextualize to what has happened against the national backdrop. This is not the first major cyber attack that we've seen over the space of the past couple weeks. But indeed, this one has gained national prominence because it affects the major telecommunications provider of Trinidad and Tobago. And I'm reminded of a quotation that we often hear, which is, what a tangled web we weave when we first set out to deceive. And all three front pages of today's newspaper illustrates the fruits of a tangled web of deceit and treachery against our nation. I will repeat that. All three front pages that says TSTT CEO gone, AGAD axed, TSTT CEO fired, is a clear illustration of the fruits of a tangled web of deceit and treachery against the nation. This circumstance warrants several questions that have remained unanswered, and it falls squarely a defeat of the Minister of Public Utilities and the government of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago. Without a care in the world, Prime Minister Keith Rowley has jetted off to Saudi Arabia, to the CARICOM conference there, not addressing the nation on one of the most critical issues that can best be described as national treason against this country. He has jetted off and gone to Saudi Arabia without giving any comfort, any reassurance, or any answers as to how this occurred, who were the players involved, and what is the way going forward. Let us first deal with the issue of the departure of the CEO of TSCT. Departure has been used very loosely, Dr. Moonilal. One newspaper has said she's gone, the other has said she has been fired, one has said that she's been axed. But what are the circumstances surrounding these descriptions of the departure of Ms. Agard? Ms. Agard has been in the public sphere for quite some time, spanning over 23 years. We heard of the departure of Ms. Agard yesterday. In some quarters, you're hearing that she resigned. In some quarters, you're hearing that she's fired. The board, through the chairman, was very circumspect and provided very little detail in terms of the circumstances surrounding the departure. And this morning, as a responsible opposition, we are calling for the Minister of Public Utilities, the chairman of TSCT, to break his silence and tell us the circumstances surrounding the departure of Ms. Lisa Agard. And I will explain to you the importance of why that bit of information needs to be known. Was she fired? Did she resign? Let us look at Ms. Agard's history. She was the former Vice President of Legal at TSCT for quite a while. I want to remind this country that she was also the former chairman of CNMG in 2017, a politically appointed position by the Cabinet of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago while she served at TSCT. Then she went on to serve as a general manager at Guardian Media Limited. After that, she served as a general manager at Amplia. And you would recall when TSCT had the acquisition of Amplia, of Massey Communications, Ms. Agard featured at the center of this. And I'm going somewhere with this in terms of pointing out the history of Ms. Agard in terms of the positions that she have held both within the public sector and the private sector. When Ms. Agard took over the role at Amplia, TSCT acquired Massey Communications at a price of over $280 million, shrouded in secrecy. You would recall it was a leader of the opposition, myself and others in the parliament in 2018, that stood in defense of the people of Trinidad and Tobago when this information was unearthed. And we asked both the Prime Minister and the Minister of Finance, were you aware of the acquisition of Massey Communications at the tune of $280 million by TSCT? Both the Prime Minister, the Minister of Finance, and the Minister of Public Utilities all got up and assured the nation they were none the wiser, that they were not consulted by TSCT or the board or the management on the acquisition of Massey Communications. Well, the chickens have come home to roost, because today, several questions similar to what arose in that situation arise today. At the center of most of the controversies over the past few years, we have seen Ms. Agard feature most prominently in terms of the controversies at TSCT. Today I want to ask frontally, did Lisa Agard walk out of TSCT's door clutching more than her pearls? Was her departure, and I'm asking this in the public interest, and in terms of transparency. Did she get buyout, as we say, or was she bought out from her contract of over $2 million? Or will she return to take the state to court for wrongful dismissal? I started off by telling you the minister and the board owes the country an explanation on this matter. We are asking whether or not Ms. Agard is a willing participant of being made a scapegoat on this matter, or is she purely innocent in this entire fiasco? What were the issues identified in terms of her departure, causing her departure? The country needs to know that, because blame needs to be appropriated in the most appropriate place. And therefore, the minister and the board cannot absolve themselves from this situation and place the blame squarely on Ms. Agard. So it is either one of two things: that Ms. Agard has agreed to be a willing scapegoat in exchange, that her contract will be bought out at the tune of millions of dollars, and that is why we are asking whether or not she left walking out of TSCT doors clutching more than her pearls, or whether or not she is being used, blamed and shamed by this administration, who has done nothing to protect the public interest in terms of the responsibility of the board and the Minister of Public Utilities. We also need to ask, who advised the minister when inquiries were made? You see, my colleagues, I believe it was Dr. Moonilal, it was the Member of Parliament for Couva North, Member of Parliament for Couva South, that got up in the Parliament and asked the Minister of Public Utilities whether or not there was any breach in terms of data being disseminated through the dark web, through these cyber attacks. In a very flippant, arrogant manner, the minister spends all of his time personalizing his attacks on the opposition instead of dealing with the job that he was appointed and elected to do. But this morning, the minister, I want to say to you, Marvin Gonzalez, you can run, but you cannot hide. Because we will continue to ask these questions and seek the answers, whether it's through a freedom of information, whether it's through questions in the Parliament, or whether or not it's taking to the streets to get the information on behalf of the people of Trinidad and Tobago. So therefore, this morning, I think it is incumbent, in light of all that has happened with Ms. Agard, that Ms. Agard must either break her silence, or we are calling on the Minister of Public Utilities to say who advised the minister and what inquiries did the minister make before opening his mouth. You see, just like WASA and TNTech, this minister takes a very hands-off approach for fear of blame. Today, the minister is passing the buck because he has a responsibility in this matter. The question is whether there is a deal between Ms. Agard and the government to go quietly to save face for the both of them. Today, everybody's business is on the road. Over 1 million customers of TSCT, their business is on the road. While for days, Minister Marvin Gonzalez sat on his hands and said no data breach occurred, it was because of the people of Trinidad and Tobago, cyber experts, the regular man and woman on the street. You know, we often say the power of the people is stronger than the people in power. Because of the opposition, experts in cyber crime, and the regular man, woman on the street, we were able to expose the deceit and the lies of this government. But it is not just the government, it is the puppets of the government. And therefore, while the Minister of Public Utilities will have us believe that he has no hand in this, I have constantly been saying to the national community that we do not trust this government. And I will tell you why we do not trust this government. The government selects, the government appoints the board of WASA, TNTech, and TSTT. The government appoints the chairman and vice chairman of TSCT. The government has a say in terms of the appointment of managers inside of TSCT. The policy of TSCT is directed because the majority shareholder of TSCT is who? the government of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago. And therefore, when this cyber attack occurred, this breach, this dissemination of 1 million customers on the dark web, it was the onus and the responsibility of not only the management of TSTT, but also the board and the cabinet through its line minister, Marvin Gonzalez. And that is why we say the minister cannot wash his hand. So it is either one of two things. It is either this is a major conspiracy involving Ms. Agard and she is being made as a scapegoat willingly, knowing that she will receive a massive payout, or whether or not the government is using Lisa Agard to save face for themselves. And that is the question that the Minister of Public Utilities, the Cabinet and the Board needs to answer, because this is not a question that is going to go away. This morning we want to call out the Board of TSTT. Sometimes people in this country hide behind position. You take big cushy positions with a stipend, but you hide from taking responsibility from what has occurred. And I want to say also to the board of TSTT, you too can run, but you cannot hide, just like Marvin Gonzalez, and we will call you out. Because this is a serious situation that has occurred in this country. I have described this situation as almost treason. And treason on the behalf of who? Who is responsible for this treason? It's not Lisa Agard only, if that is the case. It is also the Minister of Public Utilities, the Cabinet, but also the Chairman, Sean Roach, Wendell Berkeley, the Vice Chairman, Howard Dennis, Annalene Innes, Ingrid Lashley, Judith Sobian, Nicole De Freitas. These are the persons who have questions to answer on behalf of the people of Trinidad and Tobago, to the people of Trinidad and Tobago. And therefore, I also want to raise another very important issue. And that has to do with the issue of data protection in this country. So first we have dealt with who must take responsibility, but also what are you doing? It was a People's Partnership government in 2011 that had the vision and the foresight that we were operating in a technologically driven environment. We weren't seeing those cyber attacks as we are seeing today, but we saw the need to protect citizens' data and information, their personal information. And that is why in 2011, under the leadership of the Honorable Kamala Prasad Bisesa, Dr. Moonilal at that time would have been the leader of government business, brought to the Parliament the Data Protection Act. In order to operationalize that legislation, at that time the partnership only proclaimed certain sections of the legislation. Between 2012 to 2015, we were in the process of putting the infrastructure, the hardware, the malware in place to ensure that when the full act was proclaimed, that it would have operated in an environment that was conducive to ensure that we got the results that was desired by bringing to force this act. In 2015, the People's National Movement came in, and the only time they have sought to proclaim any of the sections of the Data Protection Act was just recently, and it had to do with no other reason than the coming into force of the property tax. So therefore they wanted to go into your personal information to enforce the property tax. And therefore that is why piecemeal through a miscellaneous provision in the Parliament, they took 2 or 3 sections of the Data Protection Act to use to their advantage to seek your information to transfer from one state enterprise, one ministry to the other. It was absolutely nothing was being done to enact the data protection to seek your interest. It was all about seeking their own interest. Today I want to ask whether or not government is moving with haste to proclaim fully the Data Protection Act. Today I want to ask whether or not the government is moving with haste to bring legislation to the Parliament. The Prime Minister has jetted off. This week there's no Parliament. And in a crisis where this country is faced with treason, where we are seeing cyber attacks not only at the Attorney General's office, not only at TSCT, but also we are hearing at courts, we are hearing at PriceSmart, that involves big conglomerates who stand to lose millions of, if not billions of dollars, but also putting citizens of Trinidad and Tobago at risk of criminal attacks themselves, because credit card information, banking information, and so on is now on the dark web, thanks to the irresponsibility of the government of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago. Are you moving with haste to bring to the Parliament while the Prime Minister has jetted off, leaving this country in the abyss that it is in? Senator Mark in the Senate in January of this year brought a motion to ensure that the Data Protection Act would be proclaimed fully. The government, Dr. Moonilal, voted against that motion. Today, we are in the position that we are in as vulnerable citizens, having our information outside the underworld on the dark web, at the mercy of criminals because of this government. But not only because of this government. Out of the 9 independent senators, 8 of them voted against the opposition motion to proclaim the Data Protection Act. I want to share with you what the international benchmark is in terms of government's response to cyber attack throughout the world. And there are 4 areas that every government looks at, except the government of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago. The international benchmark is 1, a dedicated national cyber security agency. For months, Dr. Moonilal has been telling you, the only agency that has responsibility with that sort of cyber security is the SSA, but they spend all their money macroing to see who Dr. Moonilal talking to see who I am talking to, who Mrs. Fasad Bissese is speaking to. The second thing is that there must be a national incident response and recovery plan. They can't even procure equipment for the fire services in this country, far less to have a national incident response and recovery plan. Today we are calling on the Minister of Public Utilities and the Attorney General to tell us what is the national incident response and recovery plan, because you have left citizens at the will of criminals in this country for the past couple weeks without any sign of a national incident response and recovery plan. We ask the Attorney General and the Minister of Public Utilities, according to the international benchmarks, there must be defined laws pertaining to all cybercrime, and there must be vibrant cyber security ecosystem. Where is all of that? You are not hearing anything from any member of the government in terms of critical areas that must be addressed in the short term and the long term. As I wrap up, there's an area that I want to highlight, and it has to do with the Joint Select Committee on Cybercrime. You know, incidentally, Dr. Moonilal, I think you and I were the opposition members on the Joint Select Committee that was established in 2017 together with Senator Mark on the cybercrime issue. And just like the international benchmarks in terms of how you go about addressing as a government, as the state's responsibility of bringing legislation, of strengthening domestic legislation that must meet the mandate of international conventions. And I'm told that the Attorney General has been speaking of recent in the Senate that Trinidad and Tobago has signed on to the Budapest Convention as it relates to cybercrime and cyber security. The issue that arises here is that in 2017, the Joint Select Committee on Cybercrime was established. In 2019, a final report came out of that Joint Select Committee. While the opposition's votes are needed because it is a special majority vote, we raised specific concerns in that Joint Select Committee. Senator Mark, myself, Dr. Moonilal. The government, Dr. Moonilal, you will recall that the Media Association of Trinidad and Tobago and several interest groups had to come and say to Faris Al-Rawi, who is the chairman of that Joint Select Committee, that there are bigger problems and in terms of cyber attacks that the bill does not address. The main focus, the myopic approach of the government at that time in that Joint Select Committee, you know, was what? Trinidad and Tobago? The biggest concern of Faris Al-Rawi, who was then the Attorney General, was who were the sources providing information to journalists, and whether or not government should put legislation in place to force journalists to reveal who their sources were. That was the biggest issue that the government sought to address in the cybercrime legislation. And when we told them, no, the Budapest Convention speaks about cybercrime and cybersecurity. It speaks about issues surrounding financial institutions. It speaks about issues surrounding people's personal data and personal information. The government did not address that in any way. They refused to take our suggestions on board. And instead, what occurred was that they brought a report that the opposition did not support because it did not address the issues of major cybercrime and cyber attacks as it relates to conglomerates, the public sector, personal information, etc. Today we are seeing the fruits of the ignorance and the obstination of this government. And that is why I tell you the government is responsible for treason against the people of Trinidad and Tobago. And therefore the minister must come out and say whether or not they are in cahoots with Lisa Agar to get a payout and take the fall for what has occurred, or whether or not they're real culprits in terms of treason against the people of Trinidad and Tobago. Is the government, the Prime Minister, the Minister of Public Utilities, and the board. And those are the questions that will not go away. Those are the questions that they must answer. I am calling on the government to indicate, because when the Joint Select Committee's report was sent back to the House, that was in 2019. A general election was called in 2020. The bill lapsed in the House. And the bill never saw the light of day since then. They came back into office in 2020, 21, 22, 23, almost 4 years later, in an environment that is technologically driven, where we have seen continuous cyber attacks against several of our state institutions. The government continues to drag their feet because of personal interest, laziness, slothfulness, and continuing to pass the buck to public servants while they continue to put Trinidad and Tobago at risk. So, ladies and gentlemen, members of the media, I know that there are several other issues that has arisen in the public sector, public utility sector. I will address those. I know one of those issues has to do with TNTech and the government mulling over the decisions taken by the RIC. I want to say to Trinidad and Tobago on that issue as I depart the podium, that the response of the government that they are still mulling over and they have made no final determinations, all of that is hogwash. It is semantics. What the government has already done, and it is in the black and white of the Moody's report of July 2023, they have already assured all of these international credit rating agencies, including the IMF, that what they will do is that they will bring into force all of these new rates, whether it's WASA or TNTech, by June 2024, so that these credit rating agencies will climb off their backs and give them an ease up. And Colm Imbert, the Prime Minister and the Minister of Public Utilities, is once more misleading the population. It is a clear case of playing smart with foolishness and semantics on behalf of the government. Bet your bottom dollar that come in the new year, you will be paying new water and electricity rates. And you will be forced to carry that burden, just as the people are being forced to carry that burden as the victims of the incompetence of this government as it relates to these cyber attacks. I now pass you on to my colleague, Dr. Moonilal, who will take you through the paces of the other issues that have arisen in the public domain, coupled with some of the other issues that has arisen as a result of these cyber attacks. Dr. Moonilal.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Member of Parliament, Mr. Barry Padarath, for a very comprehensive overview of the crisis that we face at this time in Trinidad and Tobago in the context of the cyber attacks, not only at TSTT but at other locations as well, and the role of government and indeed the role of that almost hidden board of directors at TSTT. This morning I will speak on that matter from the perspective of national security as well. But members of the press, may I also begin with a few introductory remarks and to remind the national community and the media that over the last few hours, from the official data, we have passed the murder toll of 500. So whatever is happening now, we have a murder toll at mid-November, more or less, of 500 plus. Some will say 502, but the official data, at least from the police, would tell us 500. It matters not in that the murder continues, the crime continues, the government's failure and the failure of Minister Hines and the national security apparatus continues. And that is the fundamental point, that amid all that is happening, very critical matters as MP Padarath outlined, the murder and the crime is not stopping. There is no decline in terms of criminality. Quite recently, as you would know, a German, I believe, diplomat was robbed in the company, I believe, of a local person, was robbed at gunpoint. While we express concern that diplomats are now targets, as we had been warning before, we also express concern that nationals and citizens of Trinidad and Tobago have been the targets of this type of attack, this type of robbery, this type of brazen daylight attack by bandits and so on with firearms. They have been the subject of attack for years under Keith Rowley and the People's National Movement government. Within the recent time as well, a very strange development is taking place where it seems now among the most dangerous place you can be is in front of a police station. And within recent time, like yesterday or so, someone came out of a police station having been held by the police in custody and being questioned on matters and so on of interest to the police ongoing investigations and so on. Would you believe someone walk out of a police station, the Belmont police station, a gentleman from East Dry River in Port of Spain? He was ambushed and shot as he walked out of a police station. Now, this is not the hot spot that we're talking about throughout the country. This is in front of a police station where presumably you have sentry, you have guards, you have police, mulling around in the car park and so on. And the criminal elements fear not. That is the issue. They fear not. They are now prepared to take you out in front of police station and very soon in the police station. That is where we have reached in this country. And this speaks volumes to the collapse of intelligence, the collapse of policing, the collapse of our security in Trinidad and Tobago. And who is responsible for security? Hines says he's not responsible. Dr. Rowley is always reminding us that he's chairman of something called the National Security Council. Well, he fled, he jetted off, as Barry told us. He left for a global Marco Polo type trip around the world. I think he will be in Saudi Arabia, he will be in London, he'll be somewhere else doing some things that will bring absolutely no benefits. And when we file freedom of information or parliamentary question, I put it to you that that trip Dr. Rowley is taking with, what is the guy from around the world in it? It is Passepartout. He's taken with Passepartout. They will round up a nice, cool $3 million in traveling, in eating, in hotel when they are finished with that trip. And we will get the data and show you. So while that is happening, 500 dead and more to come. They have jetted off and so on. Dr. Rowley, before he left, gave us a sick joke. He said this country must become a cashless society. There are some people who believe it's already a cashless society because people have no cash. But what he meant, of course, is electronic transactions, and instead of using cash, you use electronic transaction. He says that a week after, there has been this complete breakdown in terms of data. So imagine, I want to put it in ordinary language now. You depend only on paperless transactions, electronic transactions. Electronic transactions, whether it is credit card, it is banking information, and so on. This is the information that is being stolen. And the Prime Minister said, okay, don't use cash now. We go to electronic transaction when he cannot protect data. And I will break that down and explain in a few minutes what this data entails, because I don't think the man on the street understands. The man on the street may not understand, cyber attack and data and all these concepts, so to speak. So we'll come to that. But I want to remind the national community, several years ago, when the PNM launched a propaganda offensive and was blaming the partnership and the UNC for something called Cambridge Analytica, I believe was the name, Keith Rowley blew a gasket. His head exploded when he spoke about the sacrosanct nature of data. And he had other people in this country who passed common entrance, who have university degree. They were all exploding in the country. How can the partnership do that? Oh my data is gone. My address, my telephone, my personal data, as if they were beaten in Woodford Square with a whip naked. They were behaving like that. The pink-head man, when the TTPS went to England to interview him and said, okay, we're investigating now, tell us, what is this about? He ran. He fled. I think he changed a dye in his head. And he fled, so you couldn't recognize him no more. Mr. Griffith told us the TTPS was investigated. He said he can't collaborate that and he's not cooperating. So that was a lie. But today, Dr. Rowley jet off without saying anything about, as Barry said, this is the most serious development in the history of the Caribbean with regards to data and stolen data and cyber attacks on critical institutions that we are now facing. So they cannot protect lives, they cannot protect data. That's the first point that you have to make here now. While this is happening, murder rate is going up. And there's a sickening part of this crime. Do you know bandits held up recently a CPEP gang? They held up a CPEP gang and robbed the CPEP gang of cellular phones and some money. They held up a bar in South Trinidad and took the sales of the day. The sales of the day was $250. That is where we are today. And while that is happening, we are being told that from a national security standpoint, TSTT data gone. And I'm very happy MP Padarath called the names of the board members at TSTT. Call the names and call the names of all these board members because they remain hidden. Many of them believe they can hide and nobody will know them. We will know who is Lisa Agard because her picture is on the front page of every newspaper. So we'll know who is she, but we won't know who are the members of this board. And I want to repeat that in case, for one reason or another you didn't hear the name of the board. And they are one Mr. Sean Roach, chairman. Well, he has a BA in industrial systems, something like that. Deputy chairman, I believe, Mr. Wendell Berkeley. Next board member, Mr. Howard Dutton. Next board member, Miss Annaline Innes. Relation to another Innes in the PNM, I'm sure. Next, a person, Miss Ingrid Lashley, who has been around, I believe, some time. Next board member, Miss Judith Sobian. And final board member, for our information, Mrs. Nicole De Freitas. Quite interesting, huh? Mr. Roach, Mr. Berkeley, Mr. Dutton, Miss Innes, Miss Lashley, Miss Sobian, and Miss De Freitas. Board members at TSTT. Now, I just want to indicate that we have information in the opposition as well. We do our homework. Members of the press, you will be amazed to know that we have confirmed, we are sure. This board, led by Mr. Sean Roach, whoever he is, I'm not sure I know what he looked like. This board gave a directive through the office of the corporate secretary in TSTT. When this matter exploded in the public domain and the TSTT management wanted to respond in the public and communicate, whether they were correct or not, they wanted to communicate. allay the fears, deal with the public. The board led by Sean Roach gave a directive through the Office of the Corporate Secretary that the senior management, including Ms. Agard, should not talk to the public, should not issue any press statements unless it is cleared by the board. You know, 1 week later, they fired the lady because she wasn't communicating to the public. They fire someone for not communicating when they gave a directive not to communicate. That is where we are. So I am in agreement with MP Padarath. This entire board must be fired by the end of this working day today. They must be fired. They told the senior managers not to communicate to the public and then fire the CEO for not communicating to the public. That is where we are. So Mr. Roach, you must go and tell us what you look like. Show us your face somewhere. We don't know. This is where we are with this board. And when I look at the qualifications of this board, quite interesting. You know, nobody is trained in communications. But they wanted to communicate. Well, we all know what happened there. So you have this matter now where the breach, the cyber attacks and the breach speaks to national security. Brothers and sisters and members of the press, this matter is critical, and I will explain it in a nutshell. What is data really is information. Data, and data, I believe is singular, means information. So when you hear data stolen, information is stolen. Now, why is information important? I mean, you have a sense that money is important. People steal money. They steal, goods. They steal, wallet and phone and so on. Why is data important, and why do people steal data that way? Data is important, information, because that has your personal data, your home address, your telephone number, your banking information, who is your banker. It has information on your credit card information, where you're shopping, how much you're spending, how much money you have in the first place. That is data that people have. The various organizations will need that. For example, every 6 months they ask me, because I'm a person in public life like Barry, they ask me for the same information every 6 months in the bank. You know what they want to know? Where's my name? Where's my address? Who my banker? Where I getting my money from? Where he getting money? She getting money? All of that is data that is now compromised. And the information can be used by the criminal enterprise to attack you, because they now know where you're living, how much money you have, where you're banking, which bank is your branch, so to speak, and so on. That is the critical point. Do you know, we'll go one step further now. We have in the public domain that the Southwest Regional Health Authority has been hacked. They claim by a European organization, and they are asking for a ransom. So we have reached a stage where kidnapping now is not kidnapping the human being, it is stealing data and asking for ransom. They want, I think, 7 million in Bitcoin. So that's another type of explanation, but they want a ransom for stealing data, which will now include medical records. So when you have your medical records, which are sacrosanct, privileged, I mean, people suffer from all type of illness and so on, and some terminal illnesses and so on, regrettably. But that is your private data, your private information, now in the hands of persons who may be up to no good. So they know your elderly father is suffering from this condition. He lives at that house. He depends on going to the health center every fortnight on a Wednesday morning at 8 o'clock. You all understand where that's going? That is the information, Southwest Regional Health Authority. And what was amazing is that in the Southwest Regional Health Authority, this is from the, what is this? The Guardian, page 5 today. You know, Southwest battles the European hacker to save its system. All the news they get is 3 or 4 columns on the end, on the bottom of a page, where critical information has been hacked. I want to put it to you that we have information about courts, about Unicom, I believe it is, and about PriceSmart and so on. They keep a lot of information on clients, on customers, all exposed today. There's another issue I'll raise. Do you know, if you hack into security companies in this country and your personal private residence has an alarm system, a security system that is linked to a company that provides security, criminal elements can well know your timing of leaving, your timing of coming back, your timing of sleeping, your timing of waking. How much entry points in your house have alarm? Where are these alarm signals in a domestic, in a residence? This is a dangerous place we have reached, where data has been held for ransom and stolen by unknown forces. And the Prime Minister, who blew a gasket with Cambridge Analytica and the pink-head man, says nothing. He goes off to Saudi Arabia, where I believe they have some of the best golf courses in the world. He goes off there with Passepartout. He goes off there with someone else to chalk up a $3 million bill for us. He couldn't cancel that. So the board of directors, I said, should go. But I would also make another point here, that we must agree that global hacking is now a serious concern as a transnational criminal issue. Transnational criminal issue. And what was significant in this crisis is that we have not heard whether the TTPS has launched an investigation into cybercrime robbery, so to speak, at TSTT. There is no issue. The Trinidad and Tobago Police Service, while they couldn't protect a man in front of the police station, has not launched an investigation into this act of criminality. Let's go further. TSTT has an international partner, and I will tell you the name. The name of the partner is called Checkpoint. Checkpoint, we believe, stand corrected, but we believe, Checkpoint is an American-Israeli international cybersecurity company that has been contracted by TSTT to do what? To protect their data. To this day, we have not been told whether Checkpoint has made a report to TSTT, which is paying them, as to this major, massive cyber attack on its system. Because the taxpayers, we pay Checkpoint to be like the watchman by the door, so to speak, in a cyber world, in an online world, in cybersecurity. We are paying Checkpoint, an American-Israeli company, to watch our doors and ensure nobody gets in to steal data. We are not being told whether Checkpoint has filed a report yet. How much days have gone into this sordid affair? Whether they are still being paid. One would think you would fire them pronto after this. So no report from Checkpoint. TSTT, TTPS, with no investigation that we know of. But what struck me as well is that there is an agency in this country called the Strategic Services Agency, SSA, I think. Strategic Services Agency. That agency had a budget in fiscal 2023 of $250 million, invariably for intelligence work, spying, and so on, dealing with cybercrime and so on. Their budget for this year, incidentally, what is called fiscal 2024, is $270 million. So over 2 years alone, they are going to spend more than a half a billion Trinidad and Tobago dollars. You know, they don't know nothing about what's happening either. They're in the dark. They themselves might be hacked at any time. But they can spy on opposition politicians, trade union leaders, religious leaders in this country. But $500 million they will spend in 2 years, they cannot be involved to protect data at TSTT and elsewhere. So, as Barry said quite rightly, the government has no plan. They have no proposal. In fact, I got the same heaviness I had in my stomach when I visited the car park at Pointe-à-Pierre during that crisis with the divers. I was there Sunday night. And I had a heaviness, like a knot inside me, because there was a lack of leadership, a lack of focus, a lack of direction. And I saw it and I felt it that night. There was no government in place. There was no board in place to direct operations to save lives. Today, I'm feeling the same thing. There is no direction by the government. The minister of whatever he is, public utilities, stood in the parliament. He said, I don't know anything about any hacking. That is not true. Did you read the papers? He said, no, I didn't read the papers. I don't know that either. He didn't know anything while this was happening. In another country, the minister of public utilities must be fired forthwith. So it is left to the opposition. We are the government in waiting, and the PNM is the opposition in waiting. They are the opposition in waiting. And it is left to us to advance policy solutions. And we are suggesting that the time has come, and may come quickly, when we introduce in this country, we may have to introduce a national cybersecurity center that deals specifically with crime, criminality, and cyber crimes. If we can model after, the United Kingdom and elsewhere have these agencies, but we need a separate agency apart from the SSA, which we don't know what they're doing, apart from the TTPS that can't protect somebody in front of the police station. We need to establish a national cyber security center whose job it will be to take resources from various agencies of the state and independent experts from outside of the public sector, including industry experts, academic experts in these cases dealing with technology and so on, and form a center that will coordinate not just monitoring the protection of data through what is called cyber stress testing and so on of various agencies, but also in a crisis will be there in a crisis to understand the environment quickly, to support the public service, to support even the private sector on working on solutions to reduce the damage, reduce risk and damage. In fact, risk reduction and damage reduction are important components of confronting the current crisis that we face. And this security center can be a point of contact for all organizations that face this type of cyber attacks. So, in the United National Congress, we have been speaking, the political leader, Mrs. Prasad Bisesa, has been speaking on institutional innovations to deal with new threats in the security environment. This is a global threat as well, and it will be up to us to fashion the institutions to deal with it. We must encourage knowledge sharing and engagement throughout industry, public and private, on these matters. We must ensure that we work together with the public service and the critical public utilities that keep this type of data. I want to indicate to you that keep this data so that we can understand the cybersecurity environment. We can distill knowledge. We can give practical guidelines to industry and to the public service on how to fight off attacks by hackers throughout the world, because we all know hacking is a global phenomenon. People can sit down in a corner of the earth, in a dark corner of the earth now, and hack into computer systems and networks in any country. We have to fight off that. And a national cybersecurity center should also be equipped with the resources, human, material, equipment, and so on, to ensure that we lift the cybersecurity capability in Trinidad and Tobago, so that we are dedicated to dealing with cyber crime in the future, because I shudder to think that this will not be the last time that data is stolen, breached, and we will face cyber attacks. Now, having said that, what do? You don't cry every time something happens. You create institutions to deal with it, to prevent in the first case, and if something happens, to quickly manage, reduce risk, reduce exposure, communicate with the public, so that such an agency will also act to secure the public and private sector networks. And these are the discussions that we will have in the future to deal with this very critical issue of cybersecurity that will unravel in the coming days, as we have seen already. That agency may be a standalone agency. It may be amalgamated to an existing security agency. Those are things that we have to look at. But the government, the famous chairman of the National Security Council, he's nowhere to be seen. So he's saying nothing about that. And this is part of the crisis that we face, ladies and gentlemen. So those are some of the issues we wanted to raise today, primarily dealing with the TSTT debacle. And could I also indicate, as I think Mr. Padarath indicated, they have appointed a new acting CEO, I believe, one Mr. Kent Weston, I believe. Mr. Weston is quite instructive. Mr. Weston has been working at TSTT, I believe, for a long time, 9 months. Now, you could do a lot in 9 months, but I don't know how much experience you can have in 9 months in a major company like TSTT. Mr. Kent, yes, Mr. Weston, they had a big, in fact, I think they paid $16,000 to put his picture in the newspaper today. $16,000 to put his picture in the newspaper. And Mr. Weston has been working at TSTT, we are told, for 9 months. And this is Mr. Weston, in case you missed this full page ad by TSTT. This thing costs about, I think, $10,000 to $12,000 or so, maybe more. And it may be in several newspapers. So in case we didn't know him, we know him now. But Mr. Weston came from another company called Digicel. Is it? Yeah. Digicel is a competitor of TSTT. So they have taken someone, now, again, I cast no aspersions on Mr. Weston that way, but they have taken someone without experience in their own company who came from a competitor company and is now the acting CEO. Now, that may raise several questions for which we are not prepared today to offer answers. Because you have had a cold and a hot war over the past between Digicel and TSTT. In fact, one was trying to buy out the other. And today, the person who comes in as the acting CEO of a company came from the competitor company and has absolutely no experience in the existing company that he is now asked to manage. Those are some interesting questions that arise in this time, and they are questions that we will continue to ask and reflect upon. And the final matter I wanted to raise, because we had flashed that matter earlier o'clock in the Parliament. A member of Parliament, Saddam Hussein, I believe, has been on that matter of the DPP, office building. $55 million spent on a building that wasn't occupied for 1 hour, not an hour. They are shifting blame to blame the DPP. The DPP said, hello, this thing has to do with security vetting and security arrangements. They are inadequate. I will not put my staff to be killed. I don't think the country understands that a deputy DPP, a criminal lawyer, who had first worked with the DPP office, I believe, was assassinated in this country. Assassinated. So the government is saying that they don't know why the DPP didn't take the building. The DPP, of course, says these matters are matters of security and so on. But what was interesting is that the Minister of Public Administration, I believe she is, not West, is Weston? West, sorry. Weston is the CEO. Right, West. Yes, that's her. Alison West, Minister of Public Administration. Ms. West said no new requests yet to relocate DPP's office. Now, that is another joke, sick joke. For 8 years, you had a big building there for the DPP because the DPP wanted relocation, wanted more office space, wanted to put staff. She is now saying, I'm waiting to hear from the DPP whether he needs a new building. So what you waiting from? A sign from heaven that the DPP need offices? It is clear for 8 years you were trying to prepare a building, failed, paid rent, and today you are saying that the DPP didn't ask for any office, so we will wait for the application. This is how they govern Trinidad and Tobago. Today, members of the press, brothers and sisters, this country today is not being governed. The government has disappeared, some in Saudi Arabia, some in London, some in New York, some elsewhere. Even those who are in office, I think they have resigned in office. We are facing a crisis today without a government. We are facing a crisis today without strong public policy, without political management. And that explains where we find ourselves today. I will leave it like that, and if there are questions that take us deeper into some of these issues, both myself and MP Padarath will be happy to respond. Thank you very much.
We have no question for MP Padarath, please. Based on recent attacks, do you expect any different response from the state agencies if we are attacked again, which might very well happen?
Dr. Moonilal has gone at pains to explain how the national security apparatus in this country has collapsed. We have not only seen it in terms of the cyber attacks, but every facet of national security in this country. So I expect no different response. What I am concerned about, though, is that these cyber attacks, we are now seeing it reaching the doorsteps of the SWRHA. When you look at the patterns across many countries in the world, there are institutions, critical institutions in a country, such as public utilities, lights, electricity. So I am very fearful in a country that produces hydrocarbon and depends tremendously on that hydrocarbon to run many other sectors of the country, that we can see the possibility of attacks on the public utilities sector. It has reached the doorsteps of hospitals, it can reach the doorsteps of police stations, it can reach the doorsteps of prisons, and that is a very worrying and troubling situation. We have seen right across the waters in Venezuela, when there are major blackouts there, how criminals run rampage. And should a similar situation arise here in Trinidad, where critical institutions such as TNTech, PARIA, NGC are attacked, Trinidad and Tobago can see itself really on its knees to the mercy of these cyber attackers. So I think I raised the issue of the partnership government having the foresight of planning and preparing for data protection and so on. We are calling on this government to get up and do something. Dr. Moonilal has called for the establishment of the Cyber Security Center. I have raised the issue about the Budapest Convention and what goes with the Budapest Convention in terms of domestic legislation in tandem with that convention. The convention does not operate on its own. There must be the political will to put systems in place separate and apart from the center, but to put domestic legislation that is in tandem with international obligations to ensure that the best cyber security is available to Trinidad and Tobago. I want to also raise the issue of the minister. When I spoke earlier, there was one thing that slipped to me, and that is when the parliament resumes, the opposition will be taking a private motion, a privilege motion, a matter of privilege against the Minister of Public Utilities. It seems as though that the minister is asleep, which is a pattern across the cabinet at the wheel, and the opposition will take a motion of privilege against the minister for willfully or unwillfully. The minister will have to explain himself for lying to the country on this matter. So yes, I am deeply concerned, but when you talk about a hydrocarbon sector that deals with areas like NGC and PARIA and so on, cyber attacks can tend to focus on these major sectors and can really cripple us, and that is one of the major fears I have. When you look at international patterns across the world, these are some of the organizations and the institutions that cybercrime attackers and hackers usually tend to focus on. We are a hydrocarbon producing country. We produce hydrocarbon. And this will not only have an impact on Trinidad and Tobago, should it happen, it will have an impact on North America, parts of Europe, many of the countries that we supply natural gas to. This will have an impact on them should this happen. And these are the critical issues that we are calling on the government that you must address and that they continue to remain silent on. And this is the foresight of a responsible opposition, calling them out and saying, hey, you have to look at that. You have to plan for these things should it occur. So yes, I am deeply concerned about that.
Okay, we have one more question for him.
Yes, thank you.
What difference can the population expect with a UNC government in relation to cyber?
Well, first, as I said before, cybersecurity is an ongoing global phenomenon. It is relatively new, unlike other types of criminal, international, transnational criminal enterprise, whether it is illegal importation of ammunition and firearms, whether it is kidnapping, whether it is mafia type operations and so on. Cyber security is relatively new, but it is extremely serious, as I outlined before, because it is built on the principle of stealing data, stealing information on an individual that can easily be used to construct criminal activity. So that is why it is very critical. In this day and age, as you know, even gangs operate now with smartphones, and they have all type of clever devices around them so that you can't trail them properly you cannot, you know, build evidence properly. So they also utilize technological innovations. What you can expect is that given the role of the People's Partnership Government, as Barry told us, the data protection legislation, which we pioneered under Mrs. Kamla Persad-Bissessar. Mrs. Persad-Bissessar met with the National Security Council, I believe, every week, and we drove that institution for results. A UNC government is much more result-oriented. I think that's the first point. Secondly, we will want to introduce new institutions to deal with new challenges. You must have new policies, new program, new institution to face new threat. The cybersecurity is a global but a new threat that we face here, and we need the institutions, and we are indicating that the time has come when we cannot depend now on what they call a cybersecurity unit in the TTPS. The TTPS has at this time a cybersecurity unit. You don't know if it's one man, one woman, 2 computer, 1 laptop, if they're still operating with a landline and they take the finger and dial a number. We don't know. So that the time for that, the time has come where we must establish independent, new, innovative institutions to focus, along with industry experts, along with persons who are trained in this area, to tell us how to protect networks, how to regularly protect networks. And that is also an important point to make, is that today in November, you may think you are clean, that you have firewalls and all type of sophisticated barriers to hackers. But all of those things can collapse by January, by February. This is an unraveling type of problem. This is a matter of technology, where technology changes so often that you need to be on the cutting edge. You need to be in front, taking in front, before somebody hack and get could you imagine people can get the data from TSTT, they can get data from Public Utilities, WASA, TNTech, they can get data from the hospital. Look where we are. And data can always be used by the criminal enterprise. And that is the threat we face. But a UNC government will be proactive, will develop the institutions, will go to the parliament. MP Padarath told us there's a joint select committee on cybersecurity. We must, reactivate, re-energize those type of bipartisan committees, so we can examine industry, examine the public sector as to what they are doing, what are the challenges. Don't wait for persons to steal the data. Okay, thank you all very much. On this note, I think we have now come to the end of our midweek press conference. We want to thank MP Barry Padarath, who joined us this morning. Thank all those who have made this happen, our technical communication team, our Deputy Political Leader, Jillian John. We want to thank the Political Leader, Mrs. Kamla Persad-Bissessar, who gave us valuable insights and guidance for this activity. I want to take this opportunity to remind the members of the press in particular and the national community that on Monday 20th, I believe, the United National Congress will have a Monday night report from Couva South, the multipurpose complex at Couva South, where Mrs. Kamla Persad-Bissessar and other speakers will address the national community on these burning matters in the political, economic, and current affairs domain. So Monday, November 20th, 7 p.m., Couva South. We invite our supporters, activists, well-wishers to come out, and all of you we invite to tune in, log on to our various social media platforms on Monday, 20th November, from Couva South Multi-Purpose Complex for the United National Congress Monday night report. So on that note, I thank all of you. May God bless you all.